So I'm here to present a day in the life of an AEO. I do cover just a portion of the province, so this is kind of my experience, and it's going to be very different from somebody doing inspections up in Owen Sound, for example, or over in Kingston, Belleville area. The province is very different geographically. So I'm just going to kind of give you a look at what I've seen over there. So I'm going to talk about what we do as AEOs. I'm going to look at what we're looking for in an inspection. What are the common problems that I come across out there? And I'm going to give some points on what consultants and applicators can do to make our job easier. I kind of chuckled at that when I was given that bullet to talk about, how can you make my job easier? I work for the government already. But in Norfolk County, in particular, it's a very sandy area and a lot of high-value crops. So that particular area, I spend a lot of time in the summer responding to pesticide issues. This is ginseng here. They're out there spraying it pretty well every week with fungicides. They use liquid soil fumigants, for example, when they're establishing that. People are watching what they're doing and seeing that sprayer go out there every week, and they're very concerned. A few years ago, we had some vapor releases, impacts from fields that had been where liquid soil fumigant chlorpicrin had been applied, and there was some homes had to be evacuated. Some volunteer firefighters had to go visit the emergency department with burning eyes, that sort of thing. Some of the information we gathered back then, a few years ago, was used to make some fairly progressive...
Speak up a little bit, Charlie. Some of those in the back can't hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. Some of those observations we made a number of years ago were used to make improvements to the label directions. And so liquid soil fumigants are one area where you will find warning signs posted in agricultural fields, whereas with other pesticide applications you don't see that. And buffer zones are required now around those fields as well. I'm not a beekeeper. I am kind of intrigued by the life of bees. And worker bees really only live for 5 or 6 weeks, and they just work all the time, right? And there's a lot of stresses on that life of a worker bee. They're being attacked by varroa mites and trachea mites, and there's foul brood and all kinds of diseases. And there's these humans that keep stealing their food source that they need to keep them surviving over the winter. But pesticides do impact bees. Neonicotinoid seed treatments, and a number of years ago there were things like Furidan around on sweet corn that had pretty dramatic impacts on bees. You can say that it's not the fault of those seed treatments, but they are one of the contributing factors to the loss of bees. Those are bees all scattered around on the ground there that have almost wiped out that particular colony. So we get involved in that sort of thing, collecting samples of those bees, submitting them for analysis, and trying to determine why that colony was impacted. Well, I'm talking about pesticides. The grower pesticide safety certification program has been around for 30 years now? I just can't, I don't know. I'm surprised at how often I see this kind of thing out there. These growers are trained. They know that pesticides need to be secured and stored properly. I don't understand why we still find these jugs of pesticide out there in odd places. It's not that difficult to create a secure storage site. It can be done fairly cheaply. And there's nothing better than having a specific mixing and loading site away from wells or streams where you can take care of your pesticides and then hit it before you hit it in the field. We're also designated under a lot of other environmental legislation, not just the Nutrient Management Act. It's the Ontario Water Resources Act, Pesticides Act, Environmental Protection Act, a whole host of regulations that we are required to keep our eyes open for when we're out there doing an inspection. I mean, livestock farmers are lucky. They don't require an approval to use a shared resource like water to help grow their beasts. But crop growers do. They require a permit to take water, and that means they need to use that water, manage that water it's a shared resource, so you can't use more than you need to grow your crop. So you don't need to use it to water down the roadway, for example. So those are the kind of things that we'll be out there responding to complaints like that in the summer. And there's even air impacts from livestock operations. Not talking about odor, I'm talking about particulate and carbon and things like that. This is a greenhouse operation that burns sawdust. And when that greenhouse operation grows beyond what that boiler or furnace can, the heat that can provide, then the sawdust that's getting chunked into that burner starts to burn inefficiently because it can't burn fast enough and we get a lot of smoke. So we could be out there doing opacity measurements and require them to upgrade their system so that they're not smoking out the neighbors. During the growing season or in the early spring through the summer and into the fall, we're also out there doing inspections on spreading operations for the sewage and non-ag source material handling industry. So this, we're actually doing them when the spreading is taking place. We're measuring setbacks from wells, volumes, making sure they're tracking the volumes that are being applied to the field, setbacks from surface water, making sure all those things are identified accurately in their approved MASM plans, that sort of thing. And what do we get a lot of complaints on? Winter spreading on snow-covered or frozen ground. And here's solid manure that was piled, temporary field storage in the field. I guess it seemed like a good time to spread the manure. I mean, this really isn't snow-covered as far as the definition is concerned, is it? But it is frozen. There are worse situations. Liquid manure can be a lot worse situation, particularly where the snow is deeper. Here, it is a nice flat site, but if anybody can see it, you can rest assured that the ministry is going to hear about it, and I'm probably going to have to go out there with my measuring tape and measure snow depth and frost thickness, that sort of thing. Farmers are probably not going to be happy to see me when I'm out there with measuring tape. It's worse than spreading liquid manure on a flat field, spreading liquid manure on a slope in the winter. The day it's spread, it may look all right to that grower, but what's going to happen tomorrow? You can't predict what's going to happen tomorrow. If it's going to rain, is it going to be a slight thaw? It doesn't have to thaw very much for all that manure to end up down in the bottom low area of the field. It may freeze up again, and you've got a nice brown skating rink down there. But, I mean, I'm probably going to hear about it, and I'm probably going to be out there taking samples, and there's probably going to be some explaining to do. I'm going to be asking some questions about, where's your contingency plan? Why is your manure storage full at this time of the year when you're supposed to have 240 days of storage? And when that lake of manure melts, and ends up in surface water and stains everything the color of tea, then I think Christine's going to talk about costs as far as loss of nutrients, but there are a lot worse costs than that. Like it's probably going to cost you probably going to cost that farmer his next pickup truck and maybe the next pickup truck after that as well. When we do our inspections now, this is something relatively new. We are targeting those inspections to higher risk areas. Whereas if you're located in a vulnerable aquifer, like an unconfined aquifer, then chances are better that you're going to have an inspection than somebody who's out on clay soil and not in an intake protection zone or anything like that. So, this area right, sort of the area on the right, looks like it's a significant groundwater recharge area. It's also in a wellhead protection area, B, which is that a 2-year time of travel. I think that's probably why the second barn had to be built on the left side in the yellow area rather than over on the right side. What are we going to do when we're out there doing an inspection? Well, we're going to measure the size of that manure storage and see if it's the same size as what was identified in the strategy. We're going to measure some setback distances to surface water and the wells. And boy, if we get out there and find that manure storage is right up to the top during the inspection, we're going to start asking more questions about, what are your plans for this manure? Where are you going to be spreading it? Who's going to be spreading it? What's your contingency plan if the conditions aren't right to get some of this manure out? And wells, sure, 15 meters from the manure storage or whatever. I've run across this problem, this issue a lot on poultry farms for some reason. They want to put this well nice and close to the barn so the feed truck's not going to knock it off in there. It's not a great idea. And there are other ways you can protect your wellhead. Placement of landscaping stone, for example. It doesn't make for a great relationship when I go out there and find that the well is too close to the barn and I have to take some hard actions to get that well moved. It can be quite costly. Usually means we're not going to be on speaking terms from now on. So if you're doing a nutrient management strategy and the well isn't in there yet, please make sure they understand that well has to be at least 15 meters if it's a drill well, or 30 meters if it's going to be another type of well, from that barn if there's going to be livestock in that barn. Maybe they can even show you where it's going to be, and make sure they understand that that's what you're going to put on the submission for approval. I know this isn't part of the general nutrient management regulation, but it is a regulation under the Nutrient Management Act, and it's part of our inspections when they're out there. It's not something that anybody really wants to talk about, but we are out there looking at how dead stock is being managed on the farm. Is it being composted? Is it being buried? Is it being picked up by a licensed dead stock disposal hauler? What sort of substrate are you using? If you're composting it, are you using wood shavings, wood chips, or are you using manure of some kind? If you're using chicken litter, for example, it would have to be covered by a tarp. If you're doing it on a sandy soil, like an A or a AA hydrologic soil group, then you're going to need some sort of base underneath the compost that's better than just local soil. And that regulated compost can't be in contact with the manure pile. And what are you going to do with that compost, with that regulated compost inside? This is something that I don't like to see. This is a good indication that there's not 60 centimeters of substrate covering that dead animal. We do get a lot of calls about vermin, coyotes, neighborhood dogs dragging these white carcasses all over the neighborhood and spreading feathers all over the place. And believe it or not, we still get calls about manure being spread and feathers and parts being scattered all over the field. It's a bit of a biosecurity issue, I would say. This is an older picture going back a few years, but this is a good reason why single chamber incinerators are no longer allowed. This was a really nice looking poultry operation, but when you start looking really close, there are a lot of things wrong with this picture. I would It terrifies me to see a fuel tank sitting that close to a blistering hot incinerators. I don't know what to say here. It's catastrophic mortalities are a real emotional issue. And I do understand my family's been through a barn burning. It does have an impact on the psychology, the emotions of the grower. Some of these cattle have been in that operation for a long, long time. They know them by name. And, but there really isn't a good excuse for not dealing with those mortalities appropriately. Surface water. That's a tricky one sometimes. I mean, the definition of surface water is more complex than just if you can swim in it, surface water. But if it clearly is surface water, then you're going to need to make sure the grower understands that buffers are required if that field is required to have a nutrient management plan. And we're going to be measuring it. We'll do it. There are some gray areas, right? There are situations where, is it surface water? Is it not surface water? I'm not going to answer that question for you here today because there's lots of times when I have trouble answering that question myself. But if there's nothing growing in the bed of that channel, perhaps something needs to be done with it. If you can't drive across that without breaking the axle on your pickup truck or something, then maybe it needs to be dealt with in some better way than this. Even if it's not surface water, something is wrong with this picture. You're losing a lot of soil. There's probably better ways to deal with that situation, like through putting in a grass waterway. It's going to save you a lot of soil and save you a lot of money in the long run and lost nutrients, lost topsoil. There's more expensive ways to deal with it through water control berms, for example, directing the water down into the tile system. I'm not saying that that's the best answer. That's a pretty expensive way to deal with it, but it certainly works. It keeps the soil where it belongs on the field. Most of our inspections aren't going to take place when the farmer is spreading manure, because that tends to be a very busy time, and we're trying to coordinate our inspections to a time when the farmer can sit down and talk with us and go over the records and he's keeping that sort of thing. But we do get calls from neighbors, for example. Probably a neighbor who lives right beside this field that says, this guy's over applying manure. He's had 50 tanker loads of manure going by my farm. And we don't always go out there. Sometimes we can take 50 tankers, 3,000 gallons per tanker, 75-acre field. Well, sorry, sir, you're going to have a lot more tankers going by your house still. And it may be going on for a while. But if we find that manure is running around, the farmer tells me he's spreading 3,000 gallons per acre, or his nutrient management plan says 2,500 gallons per acre, but on a pre-tilled field, the manure is running and pooling in areas like this, then I've got a pretty good idea he's not following his nutrient management plan. How many people are going to buy manure at 2,500 gallons per acre? Not many that I know of. So use realistic application rates. If the farmer likes to spread at 6,000 gallons per acre, try and make that work in his plan. Don't just put some fictional number in there just because it makes the numbers work easy. As far as records, if he's hiring a custom operator to spread his manure, make sure he understands that we're going to need to see some records. The name of the company that was spreading the manure, not just an invoice that says X million gallons spread on X number of acres, but it's going to have some records that show what was the application rate on specific fields. Was it surface applied? Was it injected? Was it applied up to the surface and then incorporate it into the soil on the next day, that sort of thing. Try to make it clear to the grower that he's got to break it down a little bit, keep a record of those applications. This is kind of an example of what I've seen out there. I've tried to scratch out any identifiable information, but there's a fair bit of missing information here. We've got application rates and volume applied on that particular property. Could be a little more specific. Could be injected, could be surface applied, but sometimes the grower says, well, I always do it the same way. I'm always surface applying it, so I guess there's justification for them not including that here, but it would have to be included in their plan, for example. I'll be looking for other documents as well, supporting documents like manure analysis. One thing I don't like to see, for example, is it says 2.68% dry matter. The nutrient management strategy said 7% dry matter. That's going to throw off your manure storage capacity a little bit. Maybe it was an error in the way these samples were taken. So there could be an explanation, but those are some of the triggers that I'm looking for to make me dig a little deeper, find out, does he really have enough storage to get him through the winter? Soil reports, you're going to need soil reports, obviously. I'm kind of going to be looking at just little bits of this information, like the sodium bicarbonate extractable phosphate. Is it excessive? And then in your plan, are you using just the proper usable balance if the phosphorus levels are excessive? One thing I'm looking for when I'm out there is things that aren't shown in the strategy. For some reason, outdoor confinement areas for cattle aren't shown. There aren't very many of them out there anymore, but with newer expanding operations where a freestall barn has been built for the cows, sometimes the heifers are kept in the old part of the barn and have an outdoor confinement area that has a feed bunk they're fed at. If they have an outdoor confinement area, you have to manage the runoff. Don't just draw in a random flow path and vegetated area if you haven't made it clear to the farmer that this is what you're doing in this strategy. It has to be there. And if you're using a flow path, you need to have all upslope water diverted. Keep the clean water off of that surface. So he's going to need some roof gutters. There's a fair bit of improvement that's going to have to take place to make this meet with the requirements of the regulation. You get a lot of complaints about temporary field storage. Make sure that the grower understands what's required of him if he relies on temporary field storage to manage his manure. Make sure those locations are identified in his sketches so that they aren't located near a neighbor's house who's going to complain about flies or complain about odor when he's having his daughter's wedding reception on a weekend or something like that. So can you guys at the back still hear me? Okay.
Yep.
And then the big one that really gets me, particularly down in clay soils where this is quite common, there's a lot of earthen lagoons down there, and there's nothing wrong with earthen lagoons on clay soil, but they still have to be engineered. They still have to have geotechnical investigation reports. You can't just dig a hole in the clay and store manure in it. I can tell you some sad stories about what has happened when that has been the situation. There are areas where there's bedrock in Haldimand County, a lot around Hagersville, right down to Lake Erie. There are layers of sand, not too around Dunnville, for example, where there's layers of sand that could drain a liquid manure lagoon pretty quickly. So what are we looking for? We're going to be looking for things like the clay content. So this is a photo I took of a site characterization study or a hydrogeotechnical report. We're going to be looking for that clay content to make sure that it is more than 15%. That can be expressed in different ways in different reports. You know, that was a table in the previous one. This one here is a graph that shows that, you know, he's got at least 50% clay content in that soil sample. We're going to need to know which borehole that was and at which depth that was. But make sure they understand that they need that geotechnical report, and they have to keep it. Basically, they have to keep it for as long as they're going to have manure stored, so to the end of time possibly. There's some other things we look at, like the depth of that borehole where the soil sample was taken from. This one's a little less clay content, 26%, but it still should be fine. What I don't like to see is when I ask for a hydrogeotechnical investigation report, I don't like to see a one-page document that the farmer thinks this is it. This is an engineer's inspection about the soil conditions when the footing is being poured, basically saying that that site will support the barn without the barn caving in or without the wall caving in. It doesn't really say anything about the different types of soil or the location of saturated soil conditions. So don't kid yourself into thinking that a one-page report is a geotechnical report. They tend to be 5 pages or more, 5 to 10 pages. We also could be looking for engineered drawings. Why do we need to see engineered drawings? We're not engineers. What we may be looking for is something like this floor thickness here, because that's going to determine whether or not your floor is suitable and meets the requirements of the regulation to store manure. So just some tips, if you guys could help me out for take home these ideas, to pass them on to your clients. There is a requirement for an annual review and update. That requires some records. Records with a little more detail than just saying, I reviewed it, nothing has changed, sign my name. You know, I'm going to want to look, as part of those records, you're going to need some soil analysis if a plan is required. You're going to need some manure analysis. How much manure was generated by that operation, and, you know, was the manure applied plus the manure transferred? Does that add up to the manure that was generated that shows was stored in the nutrient management strategy? So there's a little more information to tell a story, I guess. I'm going to be looking for to make sure those engineer commitment certificates are available. That geotechnical investigation report should be available from now until that operation is no longer operating. The best thing that you can tell that farmer is to keep all those records in one place, because what saves me time, I mean, I have all the time in the world, I'm going to get paid either way, but if I have to take up a lot of that farmer's time and keep coming back and harassing him for information and documents and records that he can't find, then he might be of the opinion that somebody who should have been advising him never told him to do this. The farmer hasn't taken regs and protocols course. You're his window to the regulatory requirements. Please make sure he understands what's going to be expected of him if an inspection happens. So chances are pretty good there's going to be an inspection. And that's all I have to say today.